Today's focus is on distraction. Huh? I know you like that. So we'll look at the destructive impact of interruptions. We'll have some tips on how you can minimize ever having to do household chores. How you can reduce the number of distractions during your work hours, obviously. Also, I have a short rant about flip-flops that you're not going to want to miss. All that and more coming up right now on Andy in the Wild.
Hey, you could be larger than life, bigger than the world, living out the hopes and dreams of every boy and every girl. Hey, you could fly higher than the sky, shine brighter than the stars. You could have all you ever wanted, shoot the moon and reach for Mars. You know you could.
All right, so let's get to it and look at the cost of distractions and the bigger impact they can have on you, I believe, when working at home. So that brings us to an important statistic. According to the University of California, Irvine, every time you get interrupted, it takes on average more than 20 minutes to refocus. According to their study, it takes 23 minutes and 15 seconds to get back to the point you were at with your focus once you've had an interruption. And specifically, it's a type of interruption. It's not just any interruption, but we want to get rid of as many interruptions as possible. So we'll talk about them in general, and then we'll focus a little bit on the types. So this is not unique to working at home. Obviously, you can be distracted anywhere, especially at an office building. There are distractions. I kind of think that possibly the true purpose of coworkers is to have an endless supply of people to pop their head in your office and say, hey, you got a minute? Because that's what they seem to do. And it's all some of them seem to do. But why is it different when you're at home? And that comes down to the type of distraction. That's why I believe it's different. It matters because what we're going to do is we're going to assume that most of the time your buddy Doug at work isn't popping his head in your office to ask if you think that the pants he's wearing makes his ass look fat, and to get some tips from you about how to work on his glutes. That's probably less likely. Now, I'm not saying it's not going to happen. You know, we all know Doug. But at least there's a chance at work that it's going to be work related. There's a better chance, in my opinion. When you're at home, that's not the same. And the reason for that is because the type of question you're going to get asked because of the environment you're in. The other thing that they also found in this study at the University of California, Irvine, was that when you're asked a question that's related to what you're doing, it's in the same area, or it's, related to something close to what you're working on. So maybe, you work in an office and you're working on one aspect of a project and someone comes to ask you about another aspect of that project. That can actually help you do your job better. Those distractions don't require the same recovery period that a more distinct change of thought process distraction does. So at least it's possible that at work in an office building, you're going to have a related distraction, as opposed to an unrelated distraction like a dog under your desk farting, causing you to have to leave the room so your eyes will stop watering and you can breathe again. And if you saw the last episode of Andy in the Wild, there was actually a point in that episode where the dog farting situation happened. I didn't have to leave the room. I powered through it because let me tell you something. I am there for all of you. And I'm going to get through this no matter what. But just like right now, there is a dog under my desk. Actually, I think there's two right now. I'm not going to look and check. But one of them there's a good chance he may, or she, do a little something under there that I don't like so much later. But this is actually a terrible example of what I'm trying to point out with the distractions, because a distraction that is something you don't necessarily have to think about, that you can do that's a mindless activity, such as somebody bringing you some checks to sign or asking you if you can reach behind you and get that stapler out of the drawer. Those don't change your thought process. You're not taking your mind off the task you're working on to think about that. It doesn't require any thought. It's a mindless action. They don't have the same impact on us as distractions like someone coming in and maybe asking you, what's a good night to have dinner with my mother? Which may or may not require much thought. Or maybe, hey, I was thinking we should get this for Reginald for his birthday. Do you like that idea? And where should we have his party? You might have to think a little bit for a few seconds because they're not just asking you a yes or no question. They're asking you to think about something and give your input. Also, I don't recommend naming your child Reginald. Not my favorite name, but maybe I just haven't met enough Reginalds yet. At least you get a good nickname like Reggie or Reg. There's other kinds of distractions that happen, I believe, more at home also, like having the doorbell ring and your kind of busybody neighbor wanting to talk to you about your internet speeds to check and see if you're having trouble like they are, and maybe having a discussion about they think the cable company's ripping you off because you're not getting the speeds you're getting, and they want to gossip about a new neighbor. And I mean, that stuff happens, but at the same time, you don't have to necessarily think about that one, but you're not going to just pop up out of your seat, go answer the door real quick, and get rid of that person in, a minute and a half. You're going to end up having to have a discussion with them. It changes your line. It changes the process you were going down with your thought. It makes you have to get back down, sit down, recenter, refocus, and get back on track. And there's that 23 minutes and 15 seconds coming back to haunt you, right? I'm going to also tell you about, there's some things that you can do to minimize these things in some aspects, but just because we're working at home, it doesn't mean we're going to have these distractions. I just feel they're more likely. And that's from my own experience. Right now, I work in a situation where I have a lot of quiet time in the house by myself. I don't suffer from some of these distractions as often. There are times where people will have them more or less, and the summertime is when I have them more because there's more people in the house. But when we talk about an unrelated distraction, we're being specific that it's not one of those mindless things that we discussed a minute ago. It's more of the ones where you're definitely going to pull your attention off of something and refocus that attention somewhere else. Now, the example of getting a stapler out of a drawer behind you, that can actually turn into something that is a bigger distraction that will cause you to suffer the negative effects of a distraction. If you're someone who doesn't like when something doesn't work and you turn around and that drawer is broken and you go and get a screwdriver and start fixing it all of a sudden, now you have caused yourself to create a distraction when you didn't have to. You could have just moved on from that. I know some people can't do that, but that's your own fault. That's not someone else's fault for asking you to grab a stapler. I would say that anything that causes you to change what you're thinking about, so sometimes you may have heard this referred to as task switching, those are the types of distractions that have the biggest negative impact. All right, so now that we've looked at that and we've discussed the different types of distractions, how they can affect you and why, we're going to look a little more at how you get people to leave you alone, train your family. We want to reduce the number of non-work interruptions we have during the day, and that's what's important. The reason this is important is because of what we just discussed, because we're talking about the impact it has when you're taken off task. You have to change your thought process. You have to go in another direction. Then you have to come back and shift it all back again. So work training your family. How do we do that? Let's say, well, we'll call it getting our family or getting people to leave us alone during work hours when we're busy. We've talked about these things a little bit. Some of them we've glanced over them as we talked about things like transitioning into working at home. They're not all exactly the same, but some of them cover the same ground. They have the same basic concepts. And one of those is when you first start working at home, it's not just new to you, it's new to everybody. So that comes to the first item I want to tell you is be gentle in the beginning. Do not do what one guy I know did when he was transitioning from one office to another, and he temporarily took over a spare bedroom at his home and was using that as his office until the full transition had occurred and he was in his new office building. When he did this, he wasn't used to working at home, and he had not been married very long. His wife came into the spare bedroom and asked him about something related to their home, and he stood up and said, "Get out, I'm working." And that did not go over well. obviously. I mean, there's no situation where that goes over well. Don't do that. Don't be a jerk, right? Everyone else is adjusting too. Now, if you're not just starting to work at home, then maybe it's a good idea to try and remind people sometimes that we need to have focused, concentrated time where we can get our work done, and why distractions make it cause us to take longer to get our job done, and we'll have more time with other people when we are able to get our work done when we need to. There's ways you can do this. There's a lot of different ways you can do it, but sometimes we have to remind ourselves about distractions. We are, by nature, people, and we like to get comfortable and, as a result, lazy. So we do things that we shouldn't be doing that maybe at one point we knew, okay, I shouldn't do this so I won't get distracted. For example, Twitter and Facebook and all the others. Keep your mind off of that kind of stuff, because every time you go to check your tweets or check a Facebook post or whatever it is people do on the social medias, you're creating that situation for yourself. This is actually one of the reasons that I've heard people talk about the negative effects of email, because we hear that bing and we go check it right away when a notification comes in that we have a new message, or on your phone and things like that. These are all things that can take your change your thought process when you go and read a text message or you read something in an email from someone else that's about something totally different. So we can cause it on our own without being disciplined. Another thing is, when you want to remind other people in the family about this kind of stuff, or remind people that you have in the house when you're working, you might do something like talk about the really excellent podcast you heard earlier that day while you're having dinner, and just mention that it told you that on average, every time you're distracted, it takes 23 minutes and 15 seconds to recover from that. I would try that. That sounds like a good idea to me. But the negative effects really happen when you get the interruptions that are family related or non-work related, like someone wanting you to glue a head back on an Obi-Wan Kenobi action figure, or help you find those ballet shoes that you need right now because we're going to be late. That's the kind of stuff. You cannot just stop what you're doing and do those things all the time. Obviously, you're going to have to make exceptions, because I have kids too, I know. And when that head came off Obi-Wan Kenobi, somebody was upset and they needed someone to console them, and you might be the only one home. And gluing the head back on, makes you a hero and fixes everything. But let's remember that the goal is to minimize them, not to make your children cry, right? We don't want to be a dictator about this stuff. Anyway, all right. Another idea for ways we can minimize these distractions is to create a system with your family that helps to relay to them when is your work time that you need to be deeply focused, and when it's okay to maybe distract you a little more. My dad had a weird situation. His work at home scenario was very unusual with my mom. The way theirs happened, he had worked in office buildings for 30 plus years in a traditional work setting, and at one point in his career, he started working from home. So he would go into his office, and on the outside doorknob, there was a little pillow with a string, and I think it had different colors on each side, or maybe there was a message written. I don't know. But when it was facing one direction, that meant I'm on the phone. And when it was facing the other direction, that meant I'm not on the phone. But unlike what we would expect that to mean, that did not mean I'm not on the phone, it's okay to come inside. I don't know if it was ever okay to come inside the office. But when it was facing the direction that said I'm on the phone, that meant it's not okay to vacuum right now. That was what the pillow meant. So this was their system, and they had one, but in no way did my parents' situation mimic a normal one. When my dad first started working from home, my mom complained the most, not him. He was fine with it. It was laid back and easy, and he didn't have to get up and put on a suit every day. He enjoyed it a lot, but my mom complained that she couldn't get the things done that she needed to get done because my dad was in her way all the time. She would be trying to clean something or fix something or do something, and he would be in her way. And my mom really got things done. Like, if you're familiar with what a nail pop is, My mom has fixed thousands of these in the floors and in the walls and ceilings throughout her homes that she's lived in over the years. She would, she'd pull out the nail, she'd put in a wood screw or a drywall screw instead. She would patch it, sand it, paint it. She had the whole process down, and you could not tell that the work had been done. She's a pro. She did a great job. But my dad got in the way of her doing these things, in the way of her repainting a wall, or in the way of her building something, or restoring an old rusted out John Deere tractor toy or something like that. These were, she needed her space, and he was walking around all the time getting in the way. But if you come up with a system that your family can, work with and be a part of, it will help you to tell them when you need to be left alone and when it's okay to maybe interrupt you. And the best time for interruptions is probably not when you're doing difficult things that require a lot of concentration. It's when you're doing mindless things, like we all have our, our mindless tasks that we have to do, that we maybe wait until 5 or 10 of them accumulate before we even take on trying to do that part of a project or get through all those tasks, because by themselves, they don't warrant our time. Those are great times for things like this. And just for yourself, if you can schedule that deep focus time, if there's any kind of regularity in your schedule at all, and you can put that at block into a specific day and time, or time for certain days, that's going to really help you. If you can come up with that thing that's like, this week, the most important thing for me to get done is this, and then boom, pop that into the block that is going to require that focus time. If you can do that, that's going to help you get more done more efficiently and more important things. Whew. All right. Well, those are my tips for better understanding how distractions affect us and how to maybe avoid getting distracted as often, or, work through it, maybe. Ways to do that. Yeah, I don't know if that really helped with that. I hope it did. Now I'm going to rant a little bit about flip-flops, and not a lot, just a little. I have some rules. They're just basic rules for life that I follow, and strangely, several of them have to do with flip-flops, and they are usually related to when you shouldn't wear flip-flops. I'm sharing this because I think it could save lives. So the first one is, do not wear flip-flops in the rain. I almost died once walking into a Walmart when I slipped because of a flip-flop. There are just some floors that flip-flops do not handle well when wet. So don't do that. Don't wear flip-flops in the rain. It's not a good idea. Also, your feet get wet and then they're rubbing against the wet flip-flop part. Terrible. Another one is, don't wear flip-flops to get your hair cut. I personally think that's kind of gross. This may be different for women. I'm not sure. I know you have a lot of open-toed shoes kind of things, and maybe it doesn't bother you. I guess your hair could also be longer on average, and so it doesn't fall the same way ours does. With short hair, when it's trimmed, it's very, very tiny little things of hair, and they get everywhere. And when that's the idea of that being in between toes just grosses me out. Also, speaking of like gross related things, this is another one that I think is unique to men, possibly. But if you are going to be somewhere that has mass walls of urinals, such as a sporting event or an airport, I don't recommend wearing flip-flops. There's a lot of splattering that goes on, and sometimes people have bad aim that are, on either side of you, possibly. And that is really gross. I try to avoid wearing flip-flops when I know I'm going to be in a situation like that. So there you have my rant on flip-flops. I do have other rules related to shoes, not specifically flip-flops, but these are, specific, stuff like never get in a car without your shoes on. But that's mostly for my kids who wait until we're like halfway to a place and go, I forgot my shoes. Like the time that we got to church and my daughter had to go to Sunday school in her socks because she had forgotten to put her boots on in the garage. But, those are rules for a different reason. So, and not all of my rules involve footwear. So, like, for example, never plug in a blender that doesn't have a lid on it. Okay? I learned this one time on my own by getting chocolate blended stuff on a ceiling. And then I created the rule, never plug in a blender that doesn't have a lid on. And one day when I was at home, I had just put the lid on the blender and I hadn't plugged it in yet. And I was talking to our nanny and her son came over and started mashing the buttons on the blender. And she went, oh, she gasped, thinking that the blender was about to explode. But I hadn't plugged it in yet. Huh? See, I already had the lid on it, but I hadn't plugged it in yet. That's what could have happened. What if I had the opposite routine? What if my habit was plug in blender, put lid on, then blend? I could have plugged it in, gotten distracted talking to her, and then he came over, mashed on the buttons, and then you get the worst possible scenario. You get chocolate milkshake on the ceiling. Yeah, it's not easy to clean ceilings. So that was my quick additional rant, the unanticipated rant about putting lids on blenders. I hope you enjoyed that. So continuing on, that's the end of our discussion on distractions. That's a good lesson in getting distracted by yourself talking about something. I think I learned something. Maybe we all did. All right, so the next show, since we just talked about distractions, in the next show I'm going to talk about focus and productivity when there are distractions, continuing to be productive. Ways we can do that. There are some interesting tricks that you can use and little, just like you can kind of hack yourself by doing these little things that help to keep you focused. Like I'll give you a real easy, quick example. Our minds focus better and we stay more productive on our work when we're in an environment that has been, organized and is neat. When you're in a chaotic, messy office, it actually can cause you to not be as focused. So we can do little things like this to help get us over the, edge, to give us a little bit of extra, right? So if we are in a chaotic environment, we don't have these additional pulls on us, taking us away from having the focus we could have. There's a bunch of little things like that. And then I'll talk about some of my own experiences with how I've tried to get more focused and failed, and how I've sometimes succeeded. But we'll get to that in the next episode. Until then, please remember to rate, like, and follow. You can find me online, Twitter and Facebook, at Andy in the Wild. Also, if you liked this episode, if you like our show, if you like my little thing I'm doing here on the internet, talking about working at home and random other stuff, I would love to get your 5-star ratings over on iTunes and, wherever else you have the ability to give a 5-star rating or a thumbs up or a like. That would be awesome. Appreciate it always. And if you have things you want me to talk about, or if you have questions you want to ask me, not that I have answers, because, I don't know if I have answers, but you can ask me. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. A great place to do that is like Twitter, or if you're watching this show and there's a comment section down below on the website, you could go over to andyinthewild.com and there's going to be a contact form you could fill out. So all of those things. And until next time, avoid distractions, have fun, find your focus. All right. Thanks a lot.